Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of Bites of History. If you guys follow me on my YouTube channel, you know that last week I already started my Valentine's Day obsession. I know we're a month away, but I figured we might as well carry it over to the podcast and talk about the history of Valentine's Day and Valentine's Day chocolate.
Have you ever wondered how it made it to your table? Have you ever wondered how it made it to your shelf? If you love food, then this is the show for you. Bites of History with Irene.
I want to start this episode by thanking my absolutely wonderful community of patrons. I love my Patreon so much, and I'm not just saying that. It truly is something I talk about in my daily life. It brings me so much joy, and it really, really does help support me doing what I love to do. So any singular person who's even checked out the Patreon, it really does mean so much to me. And all of my patrons that are in tiers and supporting is just amazing. You guys can support the Patreon and me for just $2 a month. You can check it out right there at patreon.com/Irene Walton. So a big, big thank you and a big shout out to my patrons. I love you guys. And this is for sure yet another episode where we have a lot of sources to thank, not sponsors. Soon, I hope. For today's episode, we want to thank theroyalexaminer.com, history.com, smithsonianmag.com, forrealism.blogspot.com, and tbrnewsmedia.com. Thank you so much to the sources. We couldn't do this video or podcast episode without you. So being a lover of Valentine's Day and all things Valentine's means that I have to deal with a lot of people who don't like Valentine's Day, who say, oh, this is just some Hallmark holiday. You should love people every day. And let's just be clear, at least in my experience, that is always coming from people who do not love people every day and don't express love in their everyday life. Most people are just like, yeah, Valentine's Day is great. It's fine. Who cares? But the ardent haters of Valentine's Day are always people that are like, it's just a Hallmark holiday. It's just made up to sell money. And it isn't. It actually has this really crazy lore-filled history that has roots all the way back to 500 BC. It's so wild. Even as somebody who I thought that I knew a bit about Valentine's Day, it turns out I did not. So we're going to go through that today. We're going to talk about the history of chocolate being associated with love. We're going to be talking about the history of Valentine's Day, and we're going to be talking about the history of Valentine's Day chocolate. So that's our little walkthrough for the pod. So let's start at the beginning and we will end at the end. So like I said before, chocolate has been associated with love as far back as 500 BC, where the Mayans would harvest cocoa beans. Now, it was nothing like we know chocolate today. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the fact that chocolate comes from cocoa beans, which comes from the cocoa fruit on the cocoa tree. And it's these big, football looking seed pods. And when you open it, there's this white fleshy fruit in it that is covering the cocoa bean, the seed. You know, all the way back then, they weren't modifying their fruit in all these ways. And it wasn't their palates weren't acclimated to sweetness the way we are today. So this was a really special fruit and a special thing that they got to eat. Now, what's interesting is this. These native ancient Mayans, didn't think to, who would, to harvest and crack open and then let dry and then ferment and then crush and then mix and do all this stuff to make chocolate what it is today, because how would they have known? How do we even know? But what was interesting was they would eat the white fleshy part of the cocoa bean or the cocoa fruit, and they would spit out the seeds. And oftentimes they would spit them into the fires that they made. Now, during these fires, when they're roasting the chocolate seeds, the cocoa seeds, they were like, wow, that smells a lot better than it did before. What's going on there? So this was their first hint that something more could be made out of this fruit that they were enjoying. As they continued their cocoa explorations and different techniques on making it, it really became this big community culture building activity. And it was also, it's not the easiest fruit to deal with. It's not like you just pick an orange off the tree and eat it. Like, you have to do a lot to make it edible, make it interesting. It became a really special high status fruit, and it was called a gift of the gods. So this was already, chocolate was becoming special as far back as, 1,500 years ago. Is it 1,500 years ago? Yes. I was not a math major. As time continues on in early South America, we see chocolate techniques being elevated, crafted, perfected into this really, really special thing. So special that it actually becomes a symbol of marriage. As an example of this, we see in Oaxaca, Mexico in the 1100s, the ruler ate deer was marrying his wife in the Montalban temple. And instead of using a gold ring or, a dowry or something to represent this marriage, the marriage was represented with chocolate. It's not super clear if they ate chocolate or they drank chocolate, but the reason everyone knew they were married was because of chocolate. So we know that chocolate and love are associated as far back as, 1,000 years ago. But how do we get Valentine's Day, and how do we get Valentine's Day connecting to chocolate? You might know like a really rough history, and I'm saying you as a general you because I'm really speaking about me. I really only knew a very general history. I was like, oh, Valentine's Day, it's because of St. Valentine and he, loved a lot of people, whatever. That's not entirely true. There is so much lore and so much history around how Valentine's Day even came to be that I think we need to talk about that before we talk about how chocolate gets associated with it. There is one account of a St. Valentine that we may know as being the saint who married couples behind the marriage ban of Claudius II in ancient Rome. Claudius II thought that soldiers who were married were not quite as, ready to fight and willing to leave their families and their wives. So he put a ban on marriage. St. Valentine was then this saint who would gather them all up and marry them behind the back of Claudius II, and then got executed by Claudius when he was found out. And he was this like, oh my God, amazing saint of love. But then there's this other account of another Valentine. This Valentine was this other saint who would help rescue Christians from these intense and harsh Roman jails where they were getting killed and tortured and all of these things. And he helped, rush them out and hide them and whatever. So that's another Valentine we see. And then there's another account of a different Valentine that suggests there is a Christian prisoner in a Roman prison who falls in love with the jailer's daughter. And he writes her letters of love and admiration, and he signs it "From your Valentine." So we see a lot of accounts of Valentines throughout the years and throughout history, but it's interesting because they're all associated with selflessness and honor and love. So by the Middle Ages, which in case you didn't know, that is between, and I'm saying this because I didn't know, this is like how I always remind you when World War II was, and it's just simply because I can't remember. The Middle Ages is from 467 BC, the fall of Rome, to the 1300s, which is when the Renaissance begins. So that's that timeline. So within that timeline, which is called the Middle Ages, Valentine, Saint Valentine, becomes a really popular saint in Christianity and in Catholicism. Now, in terms of what Valentine's Day is, there's even more lore around there. So it could have been to memorialize the time that Saint Valentine got buried, apparently, because again, we don't know which Saint Valentine they're talking about, but apparently he got buried in the middle of February. So this was to like honor him and, immortalize him. And so it's this middle of February time. That's one of the reasons it could be the middle of February. Another theory that Valentine's Day is in the middle of February is because it is the Catholic Church trying to quote unquote Christianize this pagan holiday called Lupercalia. Now, Lupercalia was a feasting event, a feasting celebration to celebrate the Roman god of agriculture, Faunus. And it was all about fertility and new life. And it was very, very interesting. It sounded like quite the time. There was, just a quick trigger warning. If you are a vegan, if you do not like hearing about animal stuff, maybe skip forward a couple of moments. During this holiday, a big part of it was fertility and enhancing fertility. And part of that was sacrificing a goat for fertility and a dog for purity. With the goat hide that they sacrificed, they would then cut strips of it, dip it in the goat's blood, and slap women across the face with it. Now, you may think that that sounds terrible. Doesn't sound great to me either, my friends. However, at the time, it was thought that this would help increase women's fertility, and they were vibing out. They lined up to get that goat skin slap. I will tell you what. What else they lined up for was getting their names put in the communal urn. If you were a single woman, you put your name into this urn, and at the end of the festival, eligible men would then take out names of the women, and you would then spend a year together. Now, this was all happening during the middle of February. That's when it started. And you would come back to the next festival at the middle of February the next year. And oftentimes, a lot of these people who were paired up for a year would then get married. So maybe that's why we're associating this saint of love with compassion and connection and being together. So that could be a reason for Valentine's Day being in the middle of February as well. And another reason that Valentine's Day might be February 14th is because during the Middle Ages, people thought that that was the day birds started mating for the spring. We see this alluded to and maybe confirmed by Geoffrey Chaucer's 1375 poem, The Parliament of Fowls. And he says, I quote, "For this was on Saint Valentine's Day, when every fowl cometh together to choose his mate." So maybe that's why we have Saint Valentine's Day. The birds and the bees? Who knows? We don't see the first written Valentine until about the 1400s, and it's not until about the 1700s that Valentine's Day is a really widely celebrated thing. And we see it start being widely celebrated in Great Britain. Victorians are the first to put a real romantic spin on this holiday, and it was interesting because at the time, as we're moving forward in the 1800s, it's kind of not really encouraged that you share your feelings very openly. So in the 1800s, we see the first mass production of Valentine's Day cards that say the words for you so you don't have to, and they are a hit. In the 1840s, we see Esther Howland, who is called the mother of Valentine's Day cards. We see her mass producing the first ones in a major way. She's making these beautiful cards that are super ornate with lots of lace and ribbons and hearts and sweet things that they're saying, and they're being given out all the time. During my research of these Victorian era Valentines, I found something called vinegar Valentines, and they are something else. I have such a love for them, even though I've only known about them for a little bit. I'm like, oh my God, this is such a great idea. So vinegar Valentines are these same things. It's like a little card that you would give somebody, but instead of sharing your admiration and your love and your attraction, it's a way to be like, hey buddy, I'm taken. Please stop pursuing me. So I wrote down what one of these said. To my Valentine. 'Tis a lemon that I hand you and bid you now skidoo, because I love another. There is no chance for you. If you guys are watching the YouTube video, I just put a picture of that one right there. So Valentines have had a very interesting history, and they've been around for a long time. So we're in the 1840s, 1850s now, and people are really big on Valentine's Day, especially in Great Britain. Now, how do we get Valentine's Day chocolates? That's a great question. I can't wait to tell you. So chocolate had been rising in popularity in Europe for quite some time. And it was definitely a luxury, but it was very, very loved. It was expensive, but it was like a sign of high status, a sign of wealth, and also it was delicious. Now, with this rise in Valentine's popularity, which also coincided with the trajectory of like faster printing, which is why we were able to mass produce these Valentines, the chocolate trajectory, did I already say that? The chocolate trajectory was on the same line. Chocolate was becoming more popular and a little bit more readily available in the 1850s. Now, chocolatier Richard Cadbury had been really, really working on his drinking chocolate. Drinking chocolate, what we might know as hot chocolate. Obviously, it's different today, but drinking chocolate was super, super popular. And he had perfected his drinking chocolate, but it left him with an excess of cocoa butter that he didn't know what to do with. So he wasn't going to let it go to waste. It was the 1850s. Nothing was going to waste. He figured out how to make eating chocolates. Now, in an effort to make this new eating chocolate, which was definitely a luxury, a little bit more marketable and a little bit more attractive to his consumers, in 1861, he invents the heart-shaped chocolate box that he actually designed himself with these really beautiful ornate pictures, and it was decorated with rosebuds and cupids and hearts. It was really beautiful. Now, he wasn't the first one to put a patent on this heart-shaped box. However, it is widely believed that he was the first one to invent it. He also made these boxes super beautiful so that people would keep them and use them as little memento boxes and keep their love letters in them and little locks of hair, because that's something people used to do. And a lot of people still collect these boxes. They're obviously very hard to find. They're over like 170 years old. That was quick math. Thank you. But they're still floating around. They're definitely collector's items. They're definitely very, very cool and beautiful. If I can find a good picture, I will put one here. Now, Valentine's Day candy continues to grow. In 1907, we know that Hershey invents the Hershey's Kiss, which becomes a popular Valentine's Day treat. Although it's not until, I believe, the 70s or 80s that the red foil comes in, where we sell it, the red and pink foil for Valentine's Day. But it is a chocolate that is widely eaten and widely loved on Valentine's Day. In 1912, we see the Whitman sampler become popular for Valentine's Day in America. In the 1920s, we see Russell Stover come out with their heart-shaped chocolate box for Valentine's Day, and they have ever since been the #1 heart-shaped chocolate box sold on Valentine's Day. Now, for some just fun little Valentine's Day chocolate stats. Americans buy about 36 million heart-shaped chocolate boxes every year for Valentine's Day. That's about 58 million pounds of chocolate being delivered to sweethearts around the country every year. And I just think that's very cute. I love Valentine's Day. I am not somebody who wants like the Russell Stover box. I do want a See's Candy box. See's Candy is my favorite chocolate of all time. See's Candy, if you're listening, hello, I love you. If anybody else is listening, hello, I want See's Candy in a heart-shaped box. No white chocolate though, thank you. Anyway, that's just a quick little history on the history of Valentine's Day chocolate and the history of Valentine's Day at all. I hope you guys learned something today. Please let me know if you want some more Valentine's Day podcast episodes. I know we're still a month out, and I know it's going to be a lot on the rest of my channel, like my other videos. So if you're tired of it and you don't want to have any more Valentine's Day comment, please let me know in the comments down below. Regardless, leave a comment letting me know what you'd like me to do in the future. And also, like this video and subscribe down below. And don't forget to check out my Patreon. It is only $2 a month. Thank you guys so much for taking a bite out of history with me this week. I can't wait to take a bite out of history with you next week. I hope you have a great day. Tell someone you love them. Bye-bye. Hell yeah.